So, miscellaneous from Hebrews 11, that's where we are still. Lord willing, we'll finish that in a few minutes. Hebrews 11, the short of it is faith allows us to see things that are not seeable otherwise. And because of that ability to see, because we care, we act certain ways, we behave certain ways, we make certain choices. We see the city, we're on the way to the city, and everything we do is dictated by our sight and being on the way to the city. A few names. Verse 4 mentioned Abel and his faith. 5 mentioned Enoch and his faith. 7 mentioned Noah. 8 mentions Abraham, and 11 mentions Sarah. There is a transition in verse 8 with Abraham and with Sarah from ancestors of the entire world to ancestors of Israel, the nation itself. Verse 20, the faith of Isaac. Verse 21, the faith of Jacob. Verse 22, the faith of Joseph. Verse 23, the faith of Moses' parents. Verse 24, the faith of Moses. Verse 28, by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. Verse 29, the transition from individuals to a nation. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. I quote again the author that wrote, "The writer sees all the dominant stages of Israel's history as a progression of acts of faith." When they went from this monumentous event to this next monumentous event, it was surrounded by and induced by faith. I love this quote because this reminds me of my own life, which is the real point. I'm not saying that all of my monumentous decisions have been made by faith, but they ought to be, right? When I look back, when I die, the moment I'm just about to die, close my eyes the last time, if I look back, will I be able to say, that move I made from wherever, from Rhode Island to Tennessee, was that by faith? That decision I made to accept this job and not this one. I'll tell you, the job that I took for Nortel Networks was not by faith, that job. It doesn't mean it wasn't from God. It means I blew an opportunity, right? And so sometimes we have these opportunities blown, and we're supposed to decrease that. When y'all moved from Atlanta to Colorado, was it a move that was can you look back and say, yeah, there was a cloud of faith surrounding that move? That's the point of this. And when we die, that had better be what we'd be able to do, look back. Comments or questions on this? Okay. Raise your hand as you have opportunity. Verse 29, they, by faith, passed through the Red Sea. This is more on cooperative faith. This is the faith of a bunch of people working together. Somebody wrote, at no time was faith needed more urgently than when the Israelites faced the formidable obstacle of the Red Sea, which barred their advance with the Egyptians hot on their rear. Here they're coming. The Egyptians are coming. And there's the water on the other side. What are we going to do? Some people had to have faith. And they had to have faith working together. I say this is another, because the last time we saw this in this chapter was with Abraham and Sarah, right? Abraham had faith, Sarah had faith. You put them together, and we said the other day, what a marriage. When you have got a man of faith and a woman of faith, and they're working together, is there anything more exciting than that? I can't think of one. Maybe just as exciting as when you have a group of people. More than just a husband and wife, but a team of husbands and wives and children and all. Does this church ever face any obstacles? Besides Lee, okay, get that. And even if that is the obstacle, how do we face it? Together, working in prayer faithfully. So I can think of, there are difficulties that face congregations, positively and negatively. We want to spread the gospel, right? What should we be doing individually and cooperatively? Putting faith in God. However that manifests itself. It might actually manifest itself by all of us going out and doing the work together, or it could be we just pray about it. There's the cooperative faith needed when we're addressing somebody who's not right. Hey, we want the best for this situation. God, this person's in sin, but we love this person and we know that you're patient and they can change. Lord, be with us as we work together to go through this situation. We can name several examples, but the idea is faith working together, right? I would say that the faith of the church is only as strong as the weakest link, but I don't think that's true in this case, because the faith of a congregation really depends on how God can react to it, right? You've got one person who's carrying the weight. God can allow that for a little while, right? That's what Revelation 3 is about. Comments or questions? Okay. So, by faith, verse 29, they passed through the Red Sea. Verse 30, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. Notice he skips about 40 years of... because not all of their history is great faith, but it is for who? Joshua and Caleb and a few others. Verse 31, by faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Does anybody remember the first words she says to anyone from Israel? The first words recorded are this: I know that the Lord has given you the land. Past tense. Had the Lord already given them the land? Were they in it? They weren't in it. But what did she know? This is the context of this book, this letter right here. Look, by faith, you're able to see things that just haven't happened yet. She says, I know God's already given you the land. How is that? How could that possibly... Oh, by the way, she's who? A pagan? So faith is for more than just the Israelites, right? All right, so somebody brought up last week what's always brought up with Rahab. What's always brought up with Rahab? No. Hold that thought. Yes, her occupation. Hold that thought. He said her occupation. Yes, the lying. Because, now the person that brought it up wasn't suggesting this, was asking about it, just bringing it up. And what's the discussion, what's the argument, what's proposed by some, asserted by others? Situation ethics.
Is it okay to lie?
Is it okay to lie? If the ends justify the means, right? Because in James chapter, well, here, and in James, verse 2:25, in the same way, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? Number one, to say that this passage justifies her lying is to what?
Assert more than is what's stated.
It's not actually stated there. So let's be clear, it's not stated there. Okay? In fact, it's when she received them and sent them, which seems to be like the two sides, like the author is almost working to avoid talking about the lie specifically, okay? All right. So, so basically there are two ways that we can approach this. Number one is, first of all, what does God say about lying? What does he say about lying?
Do not lie.
Don't lie, right? He says don't lie. So, either God was permitting her to lie here, or what? And what I mean by what? Who is this woman? What is this woman? A prostitute, yes. She's not a Jew. What did the Jews have that she didn't? Don't lie. Now you might think this is odd. And the reason you think this odd implies your privilege. Truly implies your privilege. So a few years ago, I was over in Russia. There was a Christian who had been, this is my first trip, and this is what awakened me to realize, wow, somebody needs to do something somewhere. I was over there. This woman who had been a Christian for, I think, 7 years at the time, I overheard a conversation. Her question was, her statement was, you mean I cannot lie? Why can't I lie? Now that sounds odd to us, because everybody here knows, yeah, you don't lie. But you know what? Not everybody in the world knows you don't lie. No, you have to be told, just like not everybody in the world knows you don't covet. Where do you find out about coveting? In the law, right? And so either God was justifying her lying, which we know he's not. Actually, what is this actually a story of? God being merciful, patient. Yes, she had what it takes to begin a relationship with me. I'll work with that and instruct her as we have opportunity. Gary wants to say something.
Because he makes a point right here in Hebrews that she did not perish with those who do not believe, so that her faith, her belief in God, and she acted the only way that she knew how to act to save these people who are God's chosen people. The point is, she had faith.
Right.
You guys make an issue over the lying. God didn't make an issue over the lying. God said, this one had faith.
Right.
That's what he wants us to do, have faith.
Right.
Yeah.
So by the way, when we see somebody who's acting completely immaturely, but, as far as we can tell, in faith, what we should do is jump all over them. No. Right? No. Hey, praise the faith and say, hey, maybe we could have reacted this way, or here's a little information for you. Comments or questions on? Yes, Jonathan.
My opinion is that lying in general falls into general revelation about as well as do not punch someone in the face. It's the example you ought to use. I think that's a clear enough thing that people ought to be able to think on their own to get there. Whether people agree with me or not, even if you take that hard tack that she was sinning in lying and should have known better and shouldn't have done it, that doesn't justify that behavior. But like, I don't know, 101% of the patriarchs, she was presumptuous, did something she shouldn't have done, and God, big surprise, accomplished what he was trying to accomplish anyway. Abraham goes somewhere, and 2 different times, and Isaac does it too, says, oh, my wife's my sister. Of course he shouldn't have done that. And they do kind of suffer some consequences for that. Things don't go as smoothly as maybe they would have gone if they had more faith.
Yeah.
I don't know what God's solution would have been if she said, yeah, sorry, I can't do this, but they're upstairs hiding under the flax. Maybe they would have turned into mice, and who knows? You know, God can do crazy things.
Yes.
When he needs to accomplish something. So she had enough faith to get to Hebrews 11.
Yep.
Maybe she'd have been the first name in Hebrews 11 if she, who knows?
Right. If she hit right.
God's not addressing the lie.
Yes, that's the short of it. He's not addressing the lie here, so
Right.
don't make anything. John, you want to?
Pretty much the same thing. Do
Yeah.
any of us doubt that God could have used
Right,
the situation if she'd been told the truth?
right, right. Oh yeah, by the way, the word is porn. Rahab the porn. Because of the depraved society we still live in and live in more and more, is there something about a porn recently? Can she change? She can. Have hope. Comments? Okay, yeah, Gary.
Oh, maybe just one more.
Yeah.
God's fulfilling his promises to Abraham, and bringing the Messiah to the world. And these group of people who are not perfect, he's kind of bringing them along to bring the Messiah. And here's Rahab. She's in that lineage. No, she's not perfect, but God's, fulfilling the promises to these people, and he's, showing that their faith helped them along the way. Yes, they were imperfect, but helped them along the way.
Okay. In verse 32, and what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained the promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight, women received back their dead by resurrection, others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword, they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world is not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. Okay, the author just sped through a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to leave it at that. If anybody would like to bring, we've already mentioned several times, we can mention it again. Yeah, I didn't expect to see Samson here, and that gives me hope, because guess what? If Samson can make it, then there's hope for me, right? To say the same thing again. Barak, Jephthah, so on and so forth. I will mention one thing. I'll go on to emphasize again. We don't face the go out and conquer the kingdom, not the literal one, right? Our spiritual warfare, that's what we're involved with. We are weak. So how does this chapter apply to us? One of the explicit passages, from weakness they were made strong. Whether that's literal, I know it applies figuratively. From spiritual weakness, I put my faith in the Lord and He makes me stronger. And then in verse 33, we perform acts of righteousness. Yeah, there's a bunch of acts of righteousness that we were created in Him to do. Right? Ephesians 2, verse 10. This applies to us. One other thing. In the list of all these conquering kingdoms and people dying and the sword and scourgings and in verse 37 it says, now listen carefully if you're not reading out of the New American Standard or the King James or the New King James. So if you're reading out of something other than that, listen carefully. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were, my version adds or has, tempted. They were tempted. Does everybody in here, you're reading out of the ESV. Anybody else? What are you reading out? Yeah, ESV doesn't have it. Okay, the idea is this. The word tempted and the word sawn in two, are two letters off. But they're both long words, and it's two letters off, and they're in a diphthong. And so you look at these two words, and the idea is this. It might not have been there in the original, right? That's why the ESV doesn't take it. It might have been when the scribe was reading it and they were copying, somebody heard the word twice and did it, or heard one word and thought he heard another word and it got in, so on and so forth. I'm going to run with, they were tempted, okay? Because that's in the text here, and it's a valid point from other places, right? They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted. So it would be interesting. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted. Because being tempted, we don't put in the same category as being stoned and sawn in two. But in reality, which one's worse? Right? Because actually, being stoned, you are being tempted, right? Being sawn in two, you are being... So these are physical things, and all of them have the underlying... So somebody wrote, for the pious reader, this would not seem an anticlimax. For the intense violence of temptation and the horrible dread lest the weakness of human nature should succumb to it was one of the most awful forms of trial which persecutors could inflict. You remember what Paul ran around trying to get the church to do before he was a Christian? To get them to recant, blaspheme. He was trying to get them. And there was that's the form, and that's what we all go through, isn't it? And guess what? It better be on our mind. I'm scared. I put my faith in the Lord and He's forgiving. And with my faith, I'll become more mature and stronger, but I'm scared of failing. I don't want to fail. That's a real threat. The fear is real. Paul tried to get them to blaspheme, to recant. Anybody here deal with that recently? I haven't. I don't remember. I don't think it's ever happened. Lee, change your mind. 1 Kings 13 is where the king of the north sets up the altars. And the prophet comes along and says, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he's going to destroy these altars. That's verse 2. Verse 3, then he gave a son. Verse 4, when the king heard it of the man of God, he cried against the altar in Bethel. Jeroboam reached out his hand from the altar, saying, seize him. But his hand, which stretched out against him, dried up, so that he could not draw it back to himself. The altar was split in part. The ashes were poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Then the king said, please entreat the Lord, your God, pray for me, that my hand may be restored to me. So the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him, and it became as was before. Now listen. Then the king said to the man of God, come home with me, refresh yourself, and I will give you a reward. But the man of God said, if you were to give me half the house, I wouldn't do it. Verse 9, for it was commanded by me by the word of the Lord, saying, you're not going to stick around there, okay? So he heals. Here's the servant. He goes. He heals the king. And the king says to him, come to my house. Hang out with me for a little while. Who'd like to hang out with the king? I'll raise my hand to that, if for no other reason than to have a Bible study. Should there be another reason? I'll hang out with the king. Right? Who wants it? Who would like to have a little reward from the king? Come on now. Come on. Hands up. I'll take a little reward from the king. I don't know what it is. I'll take a little reward from the king. Who fell to this temptation? Along comes a leper. He's healed. Elisha says, no thanks. And Gehazi says, I'll take it. Was he tempted? Was he tempted? I'm guessing he was. Unless he was a man of strong faith that said, no, not at all. Good for him if he were. Otherwise, he was tempted. But he overcame. Right? Our temptation is more like, here, come on over. I'll give you a little bit of this. It might be the television saying that to us. It might be our friend. It might be some person. It might be somebody else. It might be a job. I don't know what it is. But this is more like our situation. They were tempted. That's a fear that we all have to deal with. Moving on. Verse 37, verse 39. All these, having gained approval through their faith. Remember, that's part of the deal. Faith allows them to see the city. By faith, they walk toward the city. And because they're that kind of people, God witnesses about them. God approves them. It's the same word that was back in verse 4, he obtained the testimony. Verse 2, they gained approval. It's the same word again here. All these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Remember, that's the situation that the recipients of this letter are in. Hey, we believed in Christ. Now, where's the promise? And they're dealing with some persecution now, right? Because they believed in Christ, and some of them are saying, I don't know about this Christ thing. And the author says, look, this is nothing new. All these people have gone through this trial of your faith, whatever degree, however, whatever form it was. These people, you've got to hang on, he says. These people, having gained approval through their faith, so they're witness that, yeah, they were faithful. They didn't receive what was promised, but yet they kept on. Verse 40, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. I am reminded of chapter 9, verse 15, for this reason he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that, since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. So God says, look, when I justify one, will be the time I justify them all. Comments or questions on chapter 11? Chapter 12. A rough outline. Looks like a fishing term. A rough outline of chapter 12. I'll just read verses 1 through 17. I know you did in preparation. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. You see, chapter 10 was, hey, you guys, you got to remember the former days because you're starting to slip. And he says, look, hang on. Don't throw away your confidence. You have need of endurance. And then chapter 11 is, look at all these people. They endured, they endured, they endured, they endured, they endured. Now, getting back to the point, therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run. And you'll notice what happens. In chapter 11, we're the witnesses, and they're running the race. Chapter 12, they're the witnesses, we're running the race. The roles have changed. Verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author, the perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, why would we fix our eyes on him? Verse 3, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself. So that, here's the result. So you think about him, and this will be the result. You will not grow weary and lose heart. Now there's going to be some admonishment. I actually think this, what we're about to read, is the harshest this author gets with regard to them. That's my opinion. It's a lengthy admonishment about them. Look, you've got to accept the situation you're in and deal with it properly. You have not, it's actually emphatic, not have resisted. You're not living up to where you need to be. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. I said you have not lived up to the point where you need to be. You haven't even come close to that, okay? You're not getting there. I'm not saying that they're in the situation where, I'm gonna shed blood, so I'm not gonna do it. Whatever the situation is, he just said about Christ. Christ, this is what Christ did, and he died. You're not even there yet, and you're failing? We got a problem here. You have not resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, for you have forgotten, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share in his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble. Make straight the paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather healed. Pursue peace with all men, and the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled, and that there be no immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears. And the author's point is, I'm talking about Esau, but the same thing applies to you. Don't mess up this opportunity that you have. All right. Questions? How excited? Was anybody as excited as I was to go over these questions? From verse 1. Why? Anyone? Surrounded by witnesses. The second part of that first question. What should we do? Two answers. One of them itself has two parts. Anyone? Who's next? Who wants to be next?
Lay aside every encumbrance
Yes?
and run with endurance.
Okay. Anybody else? So every encumbrance and sin is the two-parter. So lay aside, and then every encumbrance and sin. And run. How many encumbrances, NASB, should we lay aside? How many of these encumbrances? All of them. How should we run the race? John already answered it with endurance. What does sin do to us? Anyone? Clings closely. Different version. Anybody else? Anything else?
Weighs us down.
Lays us,
Weighs.
weighs us down. And then it lays us down. Wham. Right? Easily entangles is the New American Standard. They're all, it's an idiom. So you got to translate the idiom. And from verse 2, what should we do while running? Anyone? Yes, look to Jesus. All right. Thoughts from verses 1 and 2. Couple words here. First of all, the word run is our word trek. It's their word trek, right? You look at this and you say, oh, so we're on a trek. And what do we associate a trek with? A short, easy trip to the mall? Or ice cream? No. We're on a trek. So, therefore, now I find it's important to do this. Therefore, the lead verb is actually at the end of verse 1. Let us run. Therefore, let us run. That's what he's saying. Therefore, let us run. Now, grammatically, there are several words that modify the running. How do we run? What's going on when we run? Number 1, we have. Now, by the way, it's us. In chapter 11, look at all of them. Look at all of them. Look at all of them. And then in chapter 12, verse 1, therefore, now I'm done talking about them. Now let's talk about us now, okay? Let us run. How? Having a great cloud of witnesses. The first thing that we're doing, how are we running? We're running because we have a great cloud of witnesses. That's why some versions will say since, because we have this great cloud of witnesses. Also, most of our versions will say, let us also lay aside. But the form is exactly the same as having, and also in verse 2, fixing. And it is not the same as let us run. Let us run. How? Having a great cloud of witnesses, that's present tense. Having already laid aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Okay, so the runner who's running on the trek, when does he strip off his clothing to run? Before. That's okay, it's time to run now. And so they warm up and then it's time to race. What do you see them all do on the side? Rip, 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 and now they're ready to run. That's the idea here. Let us run. Now, with endurance. That's another way we're running. We're running. How are you going to get there? By the way, the there is the race that's set before us. So there's. By the way, it's agony. The agony that's set before us. We got to run. We got to run through this agony that's set before us. That's the path. There's another how. With endurance. The only way you're going to run through this path is through endurance. That's the way we run. And finally, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Okay, so run. This is a sermon outline right here for y'all expositional type preachers. Let us trek. Who? We. We need to trek this way. Having such a cloud of witnesses, having already put off, through endurance, the agony that's set before us, thinking about Jesus Christ. Okay, there's your grammar for you today. Sin is inherently sinful. Right? There's a tautology, is that what that is? The weight or the encumbrance is not necessary. It can be sin, but it's not necessarily. Can you think of any, even one, something that's not necessarily sinful, not inherently sinful, but it will drag you down? Let's brainstorm, class. Anything? Shall I prime the pump?
Your health.
Your health.
Bad health. I don't know if you can throw it off.
Interesting.
Yeah, just
But you can.
But if you can throw it off, this would be the kind of thing that they can fix. So can somebody get into a situation where there are some people that, here you are, I can't do anything about Charles Krauthammer, okay? We're talking about this man who just was informed he has several weeks to live. He can't do anything about that. And there's nothing, and then on the other end there are like Lee Tosti, who keeps on putting a little bit more weight on ever since I've been married and before. Whose fault is that? Mine. Yeah, Mars extinction. No, that's what I said and before. So when I was a carpenter, no fat. And then I took a job at Nortel where I had a desk job. Not only did I do that, but I started eating ice cream on break time. So, like the Bosworths, okay? So whose fault is that? So bad weight, all this to say, weight can be, or health, I say weight, because I'm thinking of me. Health can be my own, so get rid of whatever, if my bad health, because of my poor choices, is slowing me down, then I need to get rid of that. That is a valid point. Job.
But on the other hand, of the health, you can be so obsessed with
Yes.
the perfectly healthy body that it is an encumbrance.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. Excellent point. Right. Paul will say, look, this life is not about physically, do it, and he'll use the illustrations. I box so as not to, and, by the way, that's got to do with this text here, right? Job, yes, sir.
For this audience specifically, and then for us, family. For
Family.
this audience, it's the family to pull them back into Judaism.
Right. And so if my family, you just said a bad one. That's not right, Hank. If my family is jeopardizing, now let's start with my friends. That one's easy. My acquaintances. Let's remove from family, past friends to just so I deal with this person. They're costing me my faith. What do? It's easy to, in this situation, it's easy to say, goodbye. I love you. Let me sit down and study the Bible with you one last time. And then there are our friends. But we say, what is it? Bad company, right? I say we say it. Paul said it.
Also,
And then there's our family. Yes, I'm sorry, but you are a bad influence, and I can't have it anymore. Next time you want to have a Bible study, give me a call. Anybody else? Anything else? I mean, we could go on and on. Say it again.
Home improvement.
Home improvement. The evangelist happens to be a carpenter in this case. Guess what his temptation is? Right? You all are agreeing too quickly. That means it's a problem. Home improvement. Who else? Gary?
mine's not a weight or encumbrance. Mine is the idea of I think George brought this up, that the idea that like when you're running through this, that the sin is right there. It's like the devil is right there. It's so close to you all the time that you have to be so, aware of it. And
Yes.
the idea of that the way the wording is used there, that it's like you're running and the devil he's running too.
Right.
He's right there.
Yeah, you're running on a mountain ledge.
Yeah.
A very narrow one.
Yeah.
Up the mountain.
Right.
Running. Riches? Now, we haven't mentioned wealth. Can wealth drag us down? Jesus talk about don't know yet.
Every one of us in this room is.
Yeah, that's right. Jesus talks about it, right? How about a spouse? Now, I am not here to suggest that if you're married, you get rid of your spouse. But does Paul talk about, look, this is a situation right now where my advice is, if you're not married, don't get married. Why? Because Paul didn't like women? Or men? No. It's because you will be concerned about, you're going to be distracted. I think the word in the New American Standard is distracted, okay? That's the issue. Now, obviously, that's a situation dependent and a person dependent. Again, it's not inherently sinful to be married. Insane to even suggest such a thing. I need my notes here. How about familiarity with wisdom of the world or pursuit of knowledge? What is there no end of? Books. But what do? Weary the soul. I got books. I love books. Could that be a problem? It certainly could. And when it becomes a problem, what do? You have a book burning. Fahrenheit 451, right? 451. So yeah, the question is, does this further the administration of God? That's always what I'm about to do. Is this going to be better? Mindy. Volunteering to do good works. Yes, because Right now, your job is not to volunteer for everybody else, but to take care of your family, mom, dad, or whatever the case might be. Yeah, but this is a good work. Only in a certain context is it absolutely good. The gay garment of sin may at first be lightly put on and lightly laid aside, but it afterwards becomes like the fabled shirt of Nessus eating into the bones as if it were fire. The people who run marathons will tell you that the slightest, the tiniest little thing that is unnecessary to be wearing will drive them nuts mentally when they get a few miles in. Get rid of it. The wedding ring. Really? Yes. It's the difference between making it and breaking it. About thinking about fixing our eyes on Jesus. The concentration, the word, okay, this word is looking from or thinking from, okay? From thinking. I'm from thinking. I'm not just thinking. I am from thinking. I'm not only to thinking, I am from thinking. So I am not thinking on this. I'm not. I will not think about this. Instead, I will think about this over here. The concentration of the wandering gaze into a single direction. I'm now no longer just, what's going on? No, that's not the life of somebody who's going to win this race. Not at all. And definite looking away from others and directing one's gaze toward Jesus. So the more you're looking at Jesus, we talked about job, we talked about riches, we talked about a myriad things right just now. The more we look at Jesus, what will we be distracted by less and less? Everything we just mentioned. No, I'm just looking at Jesus. I'm looking at Jesus. What about this thing over here? I didn't even see it. I missed that. I want to get there, right? By the way, when they're going through persecution, who is the other they are most tempted to look at? Exactly. When you're going through a problem, who are you thinking about? Me. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about me when I'm going through a problem. You're thinking about you. Me. That's what you're tempted to think about. And we've got to, instead of thinking about me, look at him, fixing our eyes on Jesus, who himself didn't think about me, but fixed his eyes on the joy set before him. No athlete, about this agony, no athlete can expect to win without determination. No athlete can expect to win without excruciation. It is work. No athlete can expect to win without first preparing, and no athlete can expect to win without then running. The reason why the word "let us run," the reason why "therefore" is so far separated from "run" is because he throws in all this other stuff to emphasize what he's finally going to get to. Look, you've got to do this. We've got a cloud. Yes, we've got to lay off. But if you just lay off all the stuff and you never run, where are you going to get? Nowhere. You've got to run. You folks, you're not running.
I think of I'm fixing our eyes on Jesus. Every time I think of this, I think of when Peter was walking on the water.
Yes.
When he was walking on the water, he was doing fine when he was looking at Jesus, and when he looked around and saw how stormy the water was and all the other things, he started to slip.
Right. A couple points here. Just one point that I have to make, and that is, the longer we do this, the longer we fix our eyes on Jesus, the longer we put off, will we put off more and more? Right? When you became a Christian at first, did you put off some things? Have you put off anything else since then? Say yes. Right? You better have put something else off since then. It's like, okay, I'm a Christian. I put off getting drunk. Yeah. Okay, good. Amen. Wonderful. But then there's some more, and some of them aren't even inherently sinful. Now, I realize this is a problem for me right now. I put it off. Verse 2, I'm kind of done. I'm going to finish right at 10 up, I think. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Now, there are several words here. That is, Jesus went through the exact same situation that you're going through now. Okay? The author and perfecter of faith. I kind of dealt with this a few chapters ago. I don't want to deal with it again right now. Who, for the joy set before him. Okay, we have a race set before us. He has a cross set before him. But here, what's actually set before him is the joy. So Jesus is seeing past the cross to the eventual reward. We have before us an agony set there. We've got to see past the agony to the reward, which is being with the Lord. He endured the cross. We endure the race. His race was the cross, the end of the race. Despising the shame. By the way, was there shame involved in being on the cross? Did Jesus know it? But how did he handle it? I don't care. I despise the shame. I don't care about the... Yes, I know there's shame, but to get to the goal, that's not important to me. What's important is that I keep on keeping on. He endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We want to get there. We want to sit by him. Anybody want to sit by him? We've got to look at him. Keep your eyes on him. Keep on seeing him. I know you can't see him, but you can by faith. Keep on making your decisions by faith. By the way, these decisions that we make by faith, are they big decisions?
Sometimes.
You got the answer I'm looking for. Sometimes, but are all of them big decisions? No, they are 1,000 little decisions you make every hour. It took me a long time to realize that. No, to set myself up to have a life of faith, it's not just, should I take this job? I'm going to start praying about this job because this is really big. Okay, yes, do that. But this moment, I'm not going to think that thought and move on from there. I'm all done. Comments or questions? George first.
This is the pray without ceasing concept.
Yeah, right.
I mean, over and over again, that the author, blows the idea of once saved, always saved.
Oh,
I mean, in this passage, like,
right,
wow, does he emphasize it? Could he emphasize it greater?
right,
Like,
right. Thank you for your work. We'll break till right on the hour.